Welcome. You are listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an internet radio show, and we are moving through CHIRON right now with Ari Moshe and looking at CHIRON in the different houses and signs. We are already at CHIRON in Capricorn, or the 10th house. So if you have this symbol in your chart or you know somebody who has it, we're going to be going in depth, discussing the nature of Chiron and Capricorn of the 10th, and then sharing different charts of people you have heard of who also share the same signature. So I'd like to welcome Ari Moshe back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back.
All right. Good to be here.
Look at her.
Look at her. Looks a lot like you.
Yeah, I guess so, without the dark hair.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because when we were getting ready today, I'd forgotten we had found this image, and I was doing some searches early this morning, and I found an image with a woman with dirt on her face. And, you know, like, just, you know, to me, it reminded me of the same kind of vibe where you're carrying around extra stuff that you don't want on you, right? You just feel weighted down. I mean, it's literally like she'd just been through some kind of, I don't know, sandstorm, a mud storm. And it was just, you know, when I think of Capricorn so much, I think about everything that we have in place to protect us or to defend against us, or anything that weighs us down in some way. And it can be a symbol that connects to our history, right? So in this image that I'd seen with this woman with dirt on her face, I mean, a really pretty woman with dirt on her face, like, you know, someone had even maybe thrown it at her, right? The judgment that can come with just trying to be who you are in the world naturally. And anyway, this image that we also have here is a perfect reflection of this archetype, because she's in deep contemplation. She is reflecting about her past or about something. She is accessing all of the emotion through that polarity, the gravity of that emotion, the concern that comes with it. And I think of Chiron and Capricorn too. I think about the weight of the world. Sometimes it can feel that way when we have strong Cap or Saturn energy, or transiting Capricorn energy, Saturn and Capricorn, Pluto and Capricorn right now. So maybe some of you can relate to this image without having that natal signature. But a picture does tell 1,000 words, and that's why they're so powerful when we can, I don't know, I feel like these images that we've been finding too, Ari, that's like,
You've been finding them, yeah.
They just open an emotional door as soon as you look at them.
Yeah, these are good images.
So is there anything that you wanted to announce, or do you want to just dive in?
Let's dive in. Well, I mean, I have my upcoming Heart and Soul. For those that are watching this video in 2019, in January of 2020, I have an upcoming Heart and Soul centered community chart interpretation series. So we're just learning by looking at our own charts together in a safe and community environment. So check all that out on my website. Let's jump into Chiron in the 10th.
Okay.
So this is my first video with this awesome mic.
Wow.
In honor, how's the sound?
Awesome.
Yeah, right. So in honor of the 10th house, you know, creating a solid container for this work. When we look at the 10th house archetype in general, we're looking at how each soul coming into this world is structuring their life according to the limitations and parameters that are relevant for their evolutionary journey. And this is really reflective of what comes with the template of this life. So for example, you come into this body, there's a certain form, thus a limitation, and thus boundaries to understand and respect, and to learn how to work and operate within them. And as we grow and follow our path, that 10th house really shows where we come into our maturity, into our own adulthood. And we take on certain roles and responsibilities. As we realize that being here alive in this body means we have work to do. There's a presence. We have a role to play out. And that means really becoming aware of how our presence, our actions have an effect on the larger world around us. So there's a growing maturity and a maturation of awareness when it comes to ethics and what is right. And there's a super duper important distinction in Capricorn 10th house between learned, constructed values of right and wrong versus natural. And the natural values don't have any superficial quality. Like they're not right or wrong because of some standard of like objective right or wrong. It's an internal compass that tells us this. So, a very obvious example is if you're walking your dog and there's a lot of traffic, you don't let them off the leash.
Right.
That's sort of like an intuitive knowing. And the same way, if like a plant is growing and it hasn't yet become a tree, it's just a plantling, it's delicate. You don't climb it, you don't trample on it. But when it's a tree, the rules are different. But there's a certain respect and appreciation for time. And when we respect time, we're also respecting form and how all form and all structures and all constructs develop and evolve and grow within time. So becoming mindful of that and appreciating that and respecting the unfolding of things is a big part of the 10th house Capricorn journey. And deeply, deeply, unfortunately, so we have in our world and for all of us karmically the imprint of so much judgment and shame that holds these standards of right and wrong, which then projects the idea of what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. If I act this way, then I'm acceptable. If I act this way, then I'm not acceptable. And these are sort of more existential and abstract judgments because when you really look at them, who's judging you? Who is saying you're wrong for, dressing a certain way or eating with your hands or wanting to love a certain way or, having certain values in life or wanting to actualize your career in a certain way? The sense of wrongness or not allowed or not okay is really coming from within. And one of the tricky, sticky places in the Capricorn 10th house archetype is this very strong adherence to projecting judgment as coming from the outside. And thus consciousness forms a defense around the projected externalized judgment and needs to picture itself as right, as not wrong, as doing good, as doing a good job, as being acceptable according to whatever is being outpictured as this external judging authority. And we could have that experience where there's that karmic imprint of an actual parental figure or an influential, authority figure in one's life, judging and creating this imprint of shame and wrong and all that kind of stuff. But in the end, when we really do our healing work, there's an unraveling of that and almost like a reparenting process that's necessary so that a soul can actually look at where they have decided that they are wrong, they are bad. It's not okay to feel or to be or express or be what I am. And it thus follows that the Capricorn 10th house archetype is where a soul can really project shame and judgment on these really crystallized values of right and wrong onto others. And it's sort of like this, you don't have to be an old lady, but this is just like a fun metaphor. It's like this old lady, walking her cat outside and, sees two people kissing. And she's like, oh, this is bad.
Oh my God.
That rigid old lady is inside of all of us in some way, where it's like, this is unacceptable. And then if we find ourselves feeling something or needing something, or we connect with our own nature, our own way, that then has to interface with this, no, that's not okay. This creates so much suffering and so much pain and so much repression. And so when we put CHIRON in there, we're looking at core wounding patterns around a deeply internalized belief that I am wrong. A deeply internalized wounding experience that has created within oneself this deep vulnerability when it comes to their relationship to society, to the world, the work that I'm doing, my role as the teacher, the healer, the boss, the parent. Everything that I do can be under the scrutiny of an intense sense of vulnerability that I'm never doing it right. I'm not doing a good job. I'm always going to be criticized. I'm always going to be judged. And thus there can be this perpetual trauma and anxiety of needing to defend this externalized perception of judgment, which then creates more wounding, because the wounding pattern and the unconscious, unrealized guilt with Chiron in the 10th house can be the guilt that's created by way of violating natural ethics, not living with integrity, becoming so concerned with maybe artificial or superficial values, because the 10th house is the devil. In the tarot cosmology, we often find that Saturn, Capricorn, 10th house corresponds to the devil archetype. And the devil is depicted as two lovers with rings around their neck, but the rings are loose. They're not the chain, right? They're not shackled. They're actually loose. You can take them off, but they're living as if they're enslaved. And so that's the materialism of the 10th house Capricorn archetype, where there's such a focus on, I'm going to become successful. If I make this much money, or if my life looks this way, or I have this job and it fits this criteria or this career, or this is what my family or my relationship looks like, it fits a social mold. But the wounding that's created is there's a whole lot of repression. You end up repressing people's needs, the reality of your family, what your employers or your employees or your boss is asking for you. If consciousness is orienting so strongly to artificial values, at some point, inevitably, something's going to be denied within and without. And so there can be deeply wounding experiences within that environment, within that context, making mistakes. And then actually not making mistakes, a better way to frame this would be neglecting one's responsibilities. And because of such a strong adherence to the appearances, to the idea of approval or acceptance, there can be a resistance to taking responsibility for where there's a need to work on oneself. And so there can be a pattern of recreating wounding in one's life by way of showing up. And I've seen this so many times, like getting into jobs or situations where there's gonna be some kind of crisis, like time and time and time again. And the nature of that crisis reflects back on this core patterning to experience reality in a way where there's always going to be someone at fault. It's always going to be someone's doing something wrong. And either you're going to be the recipient of blame or it's going to be someone else receiving the blame. And the vulnerability here, the place of accessing the deep Chiron medicine is connecting with your own inner compass. Like outside of approval, outside of internalized ideas or beliefs of, because there could be an immense amount of martyrdom and sacrifice too. We'll talk more about that, but it's like showing up to do work because no one else is doing it. And there's a deep sense of, I have to do it. And that resulting in a deep sense of loss and sacrifice as well. But the medicine really isn't connecting with this internal guide, this internal compass, this internal authority to actively find out for oneself, what am I guided to do? And one's path in life might then become somewhat unconventional. Doing the right thing might not be categorized according to what others will understand, what society or your parents or your boss or whatever will deem as right. You might have to face that deep feeling of failure or judgment or criticism, but ultimately it's coming from the inside. So let me stop there. And in a moment, I'll talk more about the masochism and the martyrdom that comes with a signature.
All right, that was excellent. There's a lot of ground to cover, with one archetype, and
So much.
a lot of ground to cover with Capricorn for sure. I mean, all the archetypes. That's what I loved about the EA school when we went through the houses and signs, just being able to experience the totality of an archetype through, Jeffrey's teaching, it was just like, wow, that is just a kaleidoscope of energy right there in one sign. So it's important to know too that if you have Chiron and Capricorn or somebody else does, not all of these things are going to exist, right? There's going to be pieces of them that are stronger, more prevalent. It's kind of like when there are a set of twins and you're looking at their charts, sometimes they take on different expressions of the same archetype, oftentimes, or even at different times in their life, this can be true. So, but one thing about Chiron and Capricorn, which you were speaking to already, is this the teachings of guilt and what happens within the soul when they've either done something wrong or maybe somebody else was judging them and made them feel like they did something wrong, and the difference between what is naturally right to do and what is naturally wrong to do. So when you know you've done something that is naturally wrong, you don't need to read it in a book to know it's wrong. It's just inherent within you knowing, like you said, you don't walk on a busy street with a dog without a leash, right? That's not a good idea. And what have you, things like that. It is the guilt that we carry within ourselves, the wound connected to some form of guilt with this symbol stays in the soul forever if it's natural guilt. And we're not supposed to release that emotion because the reason it's there to begin with and will be there forever is that so we don't do it again. It's the learned guilt or the projected guilt or projected experience of someone else feeling like we had done something wrong when it is not natural. That's the kind of guilt that needs to be expunged, that can be expunged from the soul. And even if we are burdened by something we have done that is wrong and we feel guilty about it, it doesn't mean that we're supposed to punish ourselves eternally for it. It's just about being able to look at it, understand it, take responsibility for whatever it is that we've done, or take responsibility for what we've set in motion, and understand why we've created it in the first place. And by changing your orientation to what happened, meaning, okay, that was in the past, I totally effed up, and I'm not going to do that again. It's always going to be there in a weird way, like a beacon, to shine a light on what we don't want to do again. But it's not intended for us to make ourselves feel horrible about it, so it gets in the way of how we move forward. That experience of remorse or regret is intended to be more time limited, not eternal.
That's right.
Because then it buries you. It's buried by it.
And I want to say something about this point you made around guilt that doesn't go away. I personally want to reframe that a little bit. Because what I find with this guilt that you're speaking about is that it's not like a static guilt.
Right.
What it does is it opens up the heart and it actually produces compassion.
Totally.
The way that I would frame this is it creates this immense awareness where there was otherwise a lacking of awareness, which then sort of binds our hearts gradually with more and more and more and more and more beings. And that's that bodhisattvic quality that I feel is really relevant with Chiron, where we just become deeply empathic and deeply compassionate as we realize the unity of all of our suffering, not necessarily in a Neptune way. It's in a way that we can relate and connect with through our own pain and suffering. So in the 10th house, there can be this profound realization of everyone's fucked up. Everyone's made mistakes. Everyone's acted unethically. Everyone's created hurt. And to have that forgiveness for ourselves. And so this is where there's this piece within Chiron in the 10th, where a soul might be called upon to take on certain responsibilities, where in doing so, it will hurt. They will face all of their judgments, all of their fears of being wrong, of doing it wrong, of not being recognized, of not being approved of. And it's through that process that they actually get to cultivate this path of life and trusting their own authority and trusting their own inner guidance that's completely off the maps. And when we look at the chart examples, we'll find all kinds of examples of souls that, really went their own way, regardless of difficulties, but how their own path, their own career oftentimes really opened their heart, really made them more human in a way. And that their contribution to the world came from their toils, from their struggles with finding their authentic place in life. And then other people that were just creating wounding out of a deep identification with status and their social persona. So do you have anything else to add before we look at charts?
Yeah, just on the heels of what you were offering, and I agree about how that inner guilt shifts and what we do with it. It's more about when something comes up again, the soul is immediately thinking about how their actions will affect others. It's just it becomes an instinct through that cardinal square to Libra on one side and Aries on the other. And then by thinking about how this choice might affect another, through polarity, then it activates the emotions of what it caused in the past. Beautiful. And immediately then it's like a course correction, it's like creating a new groove.
That's beautiful.
And so
that's really beautiful. Yeah. On that note, R. Kelly. So let me just start off by reading some things here. So for those who don't know, or if you've been living under a rock, R. Kelly has been accused of many, many scandals and sexual harassment claims, including a sex cult, and also many years ago, a marriage with an underage woman. And at a certain point recently, all the major music services took out his music from the streaming services. And there's a reason why I'm mentioning this. I'll just read what I got from Wiki here. Spotify says, we don't censor content because of an artist's creator's behavior, but we want our editorial decisions, what we choose to program to reflect our values. And then Apple Music and Pandora also took R. Kelly's music out. And then eventually Spotify reversed because it's a slippery slope of muting artists. And they eventually put his music back in. The Washington Post wrote an article in 2018 alleging that music industry executives had been aware of Kelly's sexual abusive behavior towards young women for years, but did little or nothing about them due to his success as a performer and songwriter. So his career, his fame, his larger-than-life persona being more important than doing what's right. And we'll come back to that. Let's look at his chart here. He has Saturn conjunct Chiron in the 10th house in Pisces. He wrote the song, I Believe I Can Fly. I believe I can touch the sky. That right there, Pisces in the 10th house. This yearning to transcend the limitations of gravity. And there's something very innocent and pure and really beautiful about that really reflects the timelessness of spirit. And I think that's what a lot of his music, that's where the music is. That's where the inspiration is. It's like there's something that takes you out of the confines, the limitations of time and space. And that's what any inspiring artist is really touching base with in some way. And so with Pisces in the 10th and Saturn there, yes, there is a career and there's a path of bringing forth this music, this art that is touching upon the transcendent. And he became known as like the father of R&B, and just like has been given all these awards and titles and classifications as, the best R&B artists ever. And all these things that really imply like success, fame, you are important, you are a larger than life figure. In a way, it's like reflecting this sense of transcending this human petty limiting mortality. And when we look at the fact of Chiron and Saturn being conjunct, and just to look at that, I mean, you have Venus in Aquarius moving into a square with a node, and that's that sex cult in the 8th house with the South node in Scorpio in the 5th house. and Pluto in Virgo in the fourth, just like this deep, unresolved emotional need for intimacy and connection. He's also had a very strong porn, sexual addiction. So and his sun sign is 8th house Capricorn, ruled by that Saturn in the 10th. So there's a whole lot here around sexual energy and learning how to use it, becoming responsible for it. A lot of unconscious shadow material. When we look at this Chiron Saturn in the 10th house, it's really speaking to this journey of integrating this internal sense of brokenness in not wanting to be limited by morality, not wanting to be limited by the boundaries and the definitions and the structures and the limitations of this world. And the wounding that he creates for others is that Pisces escapism, naivety. I can do whatever I want and break all the rules because I'm larger than life. I am Pisces God. I'm making the rules. I'm not subject to any criticism, to any punishment. I am not bound by these limitations. And that's the Chiron denial in the Pisces escapism with a lack of self-accountability of the 10th house. And the delusion of Pisces as well, that can just live in its own world. That's reflected back to oneself as real because it's a dream that you've projected that's all around you. And so this is the typical Piscean story of your sandcastle falling apart. And how does one relate here to this Chiron wounding, which is a deep vulnerability, a deep sensitivity to the judgment, to failing, to criticism? Is there a gateway here to acknowledge, oh, I have to heal. I have to work on, I need to go to some serious, deep therapeutic work and become accountable and unravel these deep wounds. And why have I been escaping? Why have I been trying to fill my own void with my own world that has been hurting others? But that's not the path that he's taken. So this is where I want to go back to reading this really twisted song he wrote recently after all these accusations came up. He wrote a song called I Admit It, which sounds great. Admission is a 10th house thing. So
I'm guilty.
What's that?
I admit it, I'm guilty, right?
Right. You'd expect that. And yeah, that's not what we got here. The whole song, and it's a 19-minute song.
Oh my gosh.
Is all about him talking about his life, things that have happened to him, ways that he's been and he'll say things, I admit it, I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes, but he doesn't admit to any of the things that he's been accused of doing. He just reacts and defends himself against them. I said, my lawyer said, don't say nothing, but I can tell you I've been set up. I admit it. However, since the first day that without knowing, I signed my publishing away. I admit it. I was young and caught up and so blind. Yeah. Said I had dyslexia, couldn't read all the contracts. But now the truth is in the message, is I'm as broke as a legend. I'm a broke ass legend. The only reason I stay on tour is because I got to pay my rent. I never thought it would come to this, to be the most disrespected artist. So I had to write a song about this because they always take my words and twist it. Believe me, it's hard to admit all this, but I'm in my feeling about this. Curse, whatever. I've been cursing all day, but I had to set the Blanken record straight. So yeah. So this is like, that's that whole like, I'm a victim, poor me, Pisces mentality here. So I think this is a great example of the wounding created with Chiron. If you're not connecting to the medicine, you're living out your pain, and that pain will often just perpetuate and hurt more other people. And staying in that denial basically means fighting God in this case. Like, I'm unwilling to take responsibility for my life, for my actions, and to acknowledge my own inner pain, my own inner hurt that has led to this. And so I'm just going to continue to create it.
When was that written, that song?
Recently, in like this year, I believe. 2019. Yeah. You can look it up. I admit it.
Okay.
Oh, July 23rd, 2018. After that movie, Surviving R. Kelly came out, the documentary series.
Well, look at his chart. He has Venus in 2 degrees Aquarius, Uranus has been squaring that, since a year ago summer,
Oh
easy,
yeah.
or since a year ago May. So in terms of the money piece, I'm only on tour because I have to pay my bills.
Right,
The
right. Good point. And
trauma,
that, yeah.
the wake up call.
And that whole, documentary, 11th House Uranus coming out on the internet, exposing him and all these accusers coming out. Good observation.
It's like that whole Pisces piece, the Saturn and Pisces, which conditions all the other planets. It's like he's not even seeing himself clearly.
Right.
It's like anything, this whole idea of invincibility as well, as you kind of mentioned. And I'm above it all. I make my own rules. And it's good that you pointed this out again, reminding people that Chiron is just not where we've been wounded, it's where we've wounded others.
Yeah. I mean, it's just so the case.
Yeah.
And it's also, that's true because you can't separate the two, right? Like if we stop with it's where we've been wounded, it's a false picture of reality. It doesn't work that way, like the
Right.
wounded and the wound and the wounder, they're all a part of one unit. And until we can unravel that and really meet ourselves, and like that's where the guilt in Chiron comes from. Yes, we've been wounded, but the guilt comes from at some point we were acting from an inauthentic place.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to meet that. And until we do, especially with the 10th house, there's going to be a constant sense of feeling pressure and weight from and a fear of being hurt again from the world, from the criticisms, from the judgments, until we really meet where we need to find and connect with our own guilt, until we come to terms with our own guilt, our own judgments. We won't really be able to heal from the outside world.
We talk about guilt when we look at the Virgo Pisces axis as well, in terms of that sadomasochistic tendency with people that, it can manifest in a sadistic way, as in his case, clearly, or it can manifest in a masochistic way. I feel guilty, so I'm going to punish you for it, versus I feel guilty, so I'm going to repent for it.
Right.
And, he just took that to a whole nother level. And he does have the moon in the sixth, with Neptune, the ruler of his Chiron, and Saturn in the sixth, also in Scorpio, which reflects, the sexual piece to this, and how his sadistic nature plays out.
Yep, indeed. Absolutely.
And that fourth house Pluto with Uranus, I mean, it's just talk about emotional arrestment.
Right.
No idea of how, it's going to continue to repeat.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Good chart.
All right. Harrison, my buddy.
Awesome.
Everyone has their beetle archetype,
Yeah, right.
He's mine. So he never wanted to be famous. He was the quiet beetle, the dark beetle. And he was kind of always afraid that like the fame would cause issues and problems and that there would be violence. He said in a quote that his first big break was when he joined the Beatles, and the second big break was when the Beatles broke up. Because when the Beatles broke up, he that year released a triple released album, like 3 sides. I'm not sure how to say it, All Things Will Pass. And it was a compilation of all these songs that Paul and John never wanted him to release. He didn't really get the chance to creatively actualize his work, his musicianship, his music as a Beatle. And so there's this deep wounding here. And this is where we can really look at the artificial value. You're successful, you're famous, you're loved, you're adored. Okay, great. But his dream, his passion was to play guitar. He wanted to play music. It's all he wanted was to play music. This guy has the sun in Pisces in the 4th house, ruling that North Node Chiron in Leo in the 10th. It's this emotional bhakti. He's just a devotional soul that wants to return to the womb. and we could even say that sun is on the cusp of the 5th house. It's kind of there too. So, which makes a lot of sense too. So, and also Venus is in Pisces in the 5th. It's just such a creative and inspired being that just wants to be in devotion, wants to connect to the spiritual roots. And so the success of the Beatles, in a way, was its own wounding experience. I haven't looked at Harrison Ford's chart, but this just occurred to me, and this is a totally creative and funny anecdote. Don't take it seriously. George Harrison is to the Beatles as Harrison Ford is to Star Wars. Because I just think of them in the same way, whereas like Harrison Ford couldn't stand all the hype and the commercialism of Star
Yeah,
Wars. And I'll
right.
end that there because I haven't seen his chart. But it's the same thing with George Harrison. Like he didn't like the fame. He just wanted the music. And so there's a wounding there of playing out this world that has an artificial quality to it. It's right. So there's that Chiron retrograde on the North Node, right? Green light, lots of energy, but there's a retrograde here. So there's a lot of introspection and unraveling. And this is actually an important point to make. When you look at the 10th house, introspection is a big part of it because we're really looking at, okay, what feels right for me? How did I get to this point in time? At what point did I sign this contract and decide that these are my social values? This is how I want to live. What does my inner compass say? What kind of life do I want to build? And how can I take responsibility? What do I have to heal? What do I have to admit? What do I have to work on? Inner inventory, really looking at ourselves and introspecting, and depression is a big part of that. When you experience depression, Chiron in the 10th or Capricorn archetype with depression is really powerful medicine because it invites an internalization and a slowing down to come to terms with a deep sense of vulnerability. And it can be by way of living a very seemingly perfect life. 10th house. You have the 1.5 children and the car and the whatever, or you're the successful person, you're famous. But where's the heart underneath it? Where's the life? Where's the real sense of inner authority? And so for him to be living his life, actualizing his own work as a musician, he wasn't able to do that with the Beatles. And so there's a grief in that for him. But then to then actualize himself, and he didn't get any royalties from his song, All Things Will Pass. Which is like a hugely famous song, because there's like this whole lawsuit where someone claimed he copied the same melody of some other song, which he said he didn't at least do it intentionally, but the judge ordered that he did subconsciously and he can't claim any royalties for that song. So, which is perfect for the statement, all things shall pass.
Right.
His whole life was a journey of dealing with the impermanence of things.
Mm-hmm.
And he learned a lot of those lessons. His first wife leaving him for Eric Clapton, having an affair with his friend Eric Clapton. And we see that with the Saturn Uranus and Saturn and Gemini in the 8th, a duplicitous marriage partner. And, this Uranus Saturn also squares the nodes. And he has a Scorpio moon. So this deep emotional nature to reconcile with the impermanence of all things, and that he can't really hold on to any kind of security. And this was the only soul, in my opinion, in the Beatles that was firmly in a spiritual stage of evolution. I feel John was transitioning into that, and that George was, definitely entered into it, was definitely in it. Anything you want to, so just like one last piece, his music then brought out this amazing quality. I mean, just look at the lyrics to some of the songs that were published with the Beatles. While my guitar gently weeps, look at you all, right? It's just the whole song is about artificial values and the grief of that. And he sings a song, isn't it a pity, isn't it a shame that we break each other's hearts and call each other names? His music really reflects the depth of his own heart, his own sensitivity to the world he was living in, the state of the world, how we treat each other. And he organized a concert. I'll just share this quote here. Live Aid, which was to, yeah. Where did I put him? Maybe I didn't save it. Okay, I didn't save it. Oh well. But one of the things that I read about the Live Aid was there's a lot of, he was doing it for this, to serve others, to serve those in need. And ultimately the effects of Live Aid brought some money, but also brought humanitarian awareness and eventually stopped the war. And I have to forgive me, I don't remember the context of what it was about. But there's all this aristocratic ego controversy around money and royalties and things that happened after the event that was just so disheartening to him.
Hmm.
It's not what he was about. It's not what he was going for.
Ugh. I hate when all that gets mixed up in a good cause.
Yeah, and it often does. It's almost
Yeah.
like there's a purification in that. It seems a part of the story.
I mean, that classic, Moon and Scorpio, there's just been so many themes around learning who to trust
Hmm.
and the power plays that go on and of course all the loss he experienced. I mean, not only does he have a Moon in Scorpio, it's on the ascendant and a very strong fourth house. So all of these experiences inevitably thrown back on himself, making him feel like he's alone in the world,
Hmm.
Even in the band when they didn't want him to record certain songs, that feeling of, what, aren't I part of this team, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
And the
yeah.
songs he released are like the most famous song. The most
Uh-huh.
famous Beatles song is probably Here Comes the Sun, without a doubt.
Right? I love that
And like
song.
the number two most covered Beatles song is Something in the Way She Moves, which is also his.
Uh-huh.
I mean, his songs are just
Mhm.
stellar.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who do we got here? Kanye West. All right.
You're bringing out all the musicians.
And I was looking for I got Lord. Yeah, all the music. I was looking for more female artists that I knew something about. Or just not
They're
artists,
good.
but just anyone. So, okay. Yeah, these are all musicians. All right. South Node in Aries in the 10th, ruled by Mars with Venus and Chiron in Taurus in the 10th house. So here's an identity structure that's become very oriented towards social value. So this guy is so funny. 3 times he got up on stage during the Emmys to like argue with who was getting the award.
Oh my
It
God,
once
no way.
happened with Tyler Swift when he believed that Beyonce should have. He got on stage and like interrupted Tyler Swift to say,
Wow. Oh my
Beyonce should have.
gosh.
And then other times it was about himself when he believed that he should have received the award. Um,
No way.
yeah.
Ugh.
So he stormed out of the auditorium after losing Best New Artist to country singer Gretchen Wilson. He later commented, "I felt like I was definitely robbed. I was the best new artist this year."
Oh my gosh. He sounds like somebody else we know.
Yeah, well, he loves that person.
Yeah, we know. I know that.
Or I don't know where he's at with him right now, but yeah.
Birds of a feather.
Right. I don't care what I do. I don't care how much I stunt. You can never take away from the amount of work I put into it.
Oh my
I
God.
put in so much work and I need to be recognized for
Oh
that work.
no.
That's
Oh
the
my
10th house
God.
dynamic. And it's almost like at some point a parent, didn't recognize you for, and I'm not saying for him, but just like there can be that trauma of like working really hard and doing the right thing and not getting any recognition. It's like, you're the oldest child of a family and your parents are gone. You have to take care of all of your siblings and your parents come home and all they say is, hey, do the dishes. So there can be this incredible wounding of taking responsibility, working so hard, but not getting any kind of recognition. And so that sensitivity here is this focus on no one can take anything away from the amount of work I put into it. I don't want to hear all of that politically correct stuff. So that was the first time. And then the whole Taylor Swift thing. And then once West walked on stage as Beck was accepting his award for Album of the Year and then walked off stage, leaving the audience to think he was joking because he'd done that twice before.
Oh my
After
God.
the award show, West stated in an interview that he was not joking and that Beck needs to respect artistry. He should have given his award to Beyonce.
Oh my. Oh yeah, right. Oh
So, um,
my God. Crazy.
he publicly apologized to Beck on Twitter. In 2015, West was presented with the Michael Jackson Video Vanguard Award at the MTV Video Music Awards. In his acceptance speech, he said, "Y'all might be thinking right now, I wonder, did he smoke something before he came out here?" And the answer is yes, I rolled up a little something. I knocked the edge off. I've decided in 2020 to run for president.
Oh dear.
And then he didn't once Trump was elected because he didn't want to contradict Trump's, run. One last piece. In 2019, West reaffirmed his Christian faith on Twitter. His wife, Kim Kardashian, described West's Christian new birth experience in September. Kanye, which is just recently, Kanye started this to really heal himself, and it was really a personal thing. And it was just friends and family. He has an amazing evolution of being born again and being saved by Christ.
Oh no.
West said, with respect to his past, when I was trying to serve multiple gods, it drove me crazy, in reference to the god of ego, the god of money, the god of pride, the god of fame, and that I didn't even know what it meant to be saved. And now that I am, I love Jesus Christ. I love Christianity. But let's just really look at this true. I mean, not to make fun of this soul. He's on his journey. And so what does this reflect? It's him on his own journey coming to terms with a strong identification with the ego of pride, the ego of fame, the ego of recognition. And so turning towards something that won't judge him, that will accept him unconditionally, that he's not going to do wrong, right? So there's a part of his consciousness that is trying on some level to reconcile with the pain he's caused and with the deep woundedness he's been carrying around. When you put Venus with Chiron in particular, it's like your sense of value, your sense of self-worth is wrapped all around these wounding experiences. And so to actually find self-worth and self-esteem, you're either going to compensate Chiron and hold this stubborn value of importance and respectability because it's just covering up for a deep sense of inadequacy. Or you'll connect with your vulnerability and realize, oh, I feel really unappreciated, unseen, unloved. And, Venus, Taurus, where in my body is that? Like sensually, kinesthetically, how am I holding myself? Like what's actually going on here? There's an unraveling process of connecting with his own embodiment, his own experience of being alive that isn't from a defensive, wounded place. And so there's potential down the road of this soul's journey. Who knows? Because I'm not one to judge. I haven't studied his soul deeply enough, but there's potential.
How long ago was that quote by his wife or whatever, or by Kardashian?
What about it?
How long ago was that quote?
1 month ago.
Yeah, again, back to this Uranus transit. I mean, it's a powerful transit. I was talking about it in one of the other charts a second ago. But Uranus has been trining his Mars and conjunct his Mars and his Venus.
Right.
So it's like this radical, change in his reality on every level.
This is a really good point. All this political stuff was, and he started to get the controversies really when he began, in 4 years ago or so, 3-4 years ago, when I guess Uranus was probably moving over his south node and he was acting out inappropriately. So yeah, this is all really interesting. And he had a falling out with Trump as well. He hasn't talked much about it, but he no longer supports that. And but who knows what's going on and what's unraveling. This is interesting, and it'd be really cool to see what continues to unravel as Saturn, enters Aquarius and squares all that.
Exactly. But, Uranus has been coming over that Mars, Venus, Chiron since a year ago, this past summer.
Yeah.
And it's, going to be on the other side of that Chiron probably in about 4 months. So I'm sure it's definitely unraveled plenty. It's just like a wake-up call,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Lord, I don't know why the graphics, I must have saved it in a different format.
All right.
So she's really cool. I just appreciate that we have a Chiron in Libra. We don't have a lot of Chiron in Libra examples. It's because of the amount of time it spends in Libra. Her Chiron is in Libra. It's ruled by Venus, which is conjunct the North Node. So this is, harmony, grace, beauty, but also around following her own authority, independent of what other people find pleasing or acceptable of her. When she first started off, her producer wanted her to sing other people's songs, Libra. But she couldn't. She had her own music. She had to trust her own self and honor her own values. And this Chiron and all the Libra planets squares this Jupiter. on the ascendant in Capricorn. So there's a really strong theme here around her claiming her own leadership, her own intuition as an artist, as a creative, as an entrepreneur, and trusting her own work in life. And she has fascination with aristocrats. She said that. And I often find Libra as having some karmic resonance with like aristocratic life, or like, I just think of like the queens of France and this like very refined, noble quality of grace and beauty.
Mhm.
And so this really, to me, speaks to where the soul has likely been on both sides of this coin of wealth and prominence, but also seeing how that wealth and prominence becomes its own trap, its own jail.
Yeah.
And then also she wrote this song, which I think describes the other end of this very much, which is her really liberating from these artificial values. Let me just pull up, I thought I said that. Let me pull up the lyrics from the internet. But it's that really awesome song, Royals.
Oh, yeah.
I've never seen a diamond in the flesh. I cut my teeth on wedding rings in the movies. And I'm not proud of my address in the torn up town. No postcode envy. And the video for this song is really cute. It's like two young boys, and they have acne. Like there's no makeup on their face. It's like really, they're just being naturally themselves, which is so good. Also for like Jupiter and Capricorn, I just really like, they're not trying to be something that they're not. And the cinematography itself reflects that. And they're practicing being boxers, and they're like punching each other, and they're laughing, and they're like on a subway. There's just something very poetic and authentic about that I think really encapsulates this 10th house energy. They're friends, they're supporting each other, but they don't fit in. They're not famous. They're coming, you can tell that they're in a more of a lower economic state. But every song is like, and she's talking about artists and musicians. But every song is like gold teeth, gray grooves, dripping in the bathroom, bloodstains, ball gowns, trash in the hotel rooms. We don't care. We driving Cadillacs in our dreams, but everybody's like crystal, Maybach, diamonds on your timepiece, jet planes, islands, tigers on a gold leash. We don't care. We aren't caught up in your love affair, and we'll never be royals. It don't run in our blood. The kind of luck's just ain't for us. We crave a different kind of buzz. Let me be your ruler. You can call me Queen Bee, and baby, I'll rule. Let me live that fantasy. So anyway, I think it's just
Yeah.
an
Wait,
example.
I was thinking, with her Mars and Virgo and Moon in Virgo, that Mars rules the South Node in Aries, that there's been a desire for all of that, but not having access to it. Maybe
That's exactly it. Yeah.
proximity, but not access.
So right on. That's
Yeah.
it. I mean, and it squares Pluto in the 11th house.
Yeah.
That's literally, to be literal, that's the aristocratic piece right there, actually.
Yeah.
Like upper echelon parts of society, groups that are exclusive. And it's like, oh, you don't belong. You're inferior. And this would be coming from different like social classes, or different, racial groups, like, that were treated that way, Virgo in the 9th house. So yeah, great observation. This is so the dynamic that the soul is working with, like
Mm-hmm.
this fame and important, and then this like you can't join the club kind of dynamic.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And really having a history of feeling that, that just not being born into the bloodline where that was happening.
Right. Exactly. I really want everyone to appreciate, just in the gift that evolutionary astrology provides, is this greater understanding and context of the soul journey, and how what we're playing out right now, the more we see our lives from a soul perspective, the more we appreciate that we very, very often create for ourselves polarities of experience. So we can uncover what's more authentic and true about ourselves without being bound by these dualities. So like when we look at Lord's chart, there's just that beautiful example of being true to yourself, not ascribing to artificial values, and becoming successful on her own, according to her own volition, her own efforts. but not holding that as an exclusive measure of better than. And that, if you look at her personality and who she is, that really reflects that. And it's just really meaningful because Chiron in the 10th house, we can have a situation in life where soul's karmically bound by certain responsibilities, and it can feel heavy. It can feel dense. It's like, oh, I don't want to do this. You know, like everything just feels like you're in jail. But that this experience itself is very temporary in the scheme of things. And that in a prior life, there may have been an experience of having no responsibilities at all, and acting in ways that created a lot of pain and hurt and difficulties for others. And if the more we become self-aware, the more we can appreciate what our lot is right now, what we have to work with, because it'll pass, and there's always a next phase. But everything wants to teach us what's happening on the inside. That's the deepest medicine here.
Oh yeah. That is actually a perfect thing to say as well, with the polarity of Capricorn being Cancer,
Mm-hmm.
where we can only evolve through the emotional door. And that Capricorn energy within all of us, you know, we have to turn in and to evolve. It's that inner space of reflection. And it is about knowing that your ultimate strength lies in your ability to be tender and soft and true to yourself, to be able to, you know, to get into the river, to the water, to surrender to that current, you know, heart, soul, spirit. The only way that you can experience oneness and lack of judgment and unification and unconditional love is by surrendering to your inner space and being able to sit in whatever is there and take responsibility for everything that's there and embrace everything that's there. And by doing that, you get in deeper touch with your soul, and through extension, spirit. The only way to experience wholeness and the holiness that we all seek.
Thank you so much. And that's that softness underneath that 10th house, that Cancer polarity you speak to. When we create two-dimensional judgments, which is what a judgment creates, a two-dimensional reality out of something that's very fluid and moving. This is who you are. This is what you want. It's like none of that's real. It's a very crystallized, set in stone projection of something that's not actually that. And so when we do that, we cut ourselves off from our emotions. It's just what happened. It's like, you know, is it a particle or a wave kind of thing, right? It's like the moment we're like, this is what it is, the wave is gone. We've just crystallized a fixed reality, and then our body is forced to conform to it. And it hurts. It's not natural. And that's where sickness really comes from in many ways. So there's something really fluid. And I think anything that we can feel, anything that we can connect with on the internal level will heal. Because karma fundamentally exists on the interior level of consciousness. And because outside and inside are one, it manifests in our lives. But when we meet it on the inside, that's where healing really happens. That's where things begin to change.
Yeah, it's turning and facing it. It's the only way it'll happen.
Yeah.
And on that note, I mean, thinking of Chiron and Capricorn, I mean, everybody's done something that they feel is wrong at some point in their journey, you know, some more than others. I have to say, I have a client that said that she doesn't have any guilt for anything. I couldn't believe I anything. Like, she literally looks back in her life and says that she didn't think she'd ever done anything wrong. I was like, wow, that's awesome, you know, amazing. But I would say that's not the majority of people. I mean, we're human is what I'm saying. Like, you know, there's all sorts of things that happen, and small things, big things for any soul. But I bring this up only because I was really amazed to hear somebody say that. Maybe that was from her own perception and perspective, right? Right. Wasn't necessarily true. I mean,
well, there's also something to say. It's like we can look back in our past and judge ourselves as I did something wrong. And maybe on one level of perception, that's true. But if we look at anything, we'll find at the core of every violation, tenderness and vulnerability and confusion. And so as we come to terms with things that we've done, it's not to like not own up and take responsibility, but we also don't have to create an identity that sticks with I've done something wrong, because that's actually just one perception of it, right? It's like, that's not the whole truth. That's not the whole picture. Like, yes,
Exactly.
things have been done that have been hurtful and you've made mistakes and you've hurt others and that is wrong, but that doesn't define you. And if you look back into past mistakes that maybe you've integrated or healing from, we can look back at it with compassion. It's like even the story, like someone else wronged me. That might be true on one level of perception, but when we come to terms with everything more and more, we find that person didn't actually wrong me. When we can see their humanity as well. We can only see other people's humanities when we're really open to our own.
Yeah.
And I think that's a big part of the Chiron Bodhisattvic expanse of never-ending compassion journey.
I thought of something, Ari, that is just like in this moment, this eureka moment I had, and that it's really, so much of it is about where your soul is coming from at any given point in time. And what I really feel like she was saying was that her intentions have been pure all along. That, even though she doesn't claim to be perfect, I know that my intentions were right and good, and I tried my best. And to her, that was enough, which I think is a really beautiful thing.
It
And a
is.
lot of people can learn from that message. Like, I'm not perfect. I was, in this circumstance, or I have experienced this challenge. I did what I thought was best. I know I brought my best, and that's all I can ask for myself. And there's something so beautiful about that she, wouldn't cling to things that would get in the way of her joy, of her life, of her knowing who she is. Because honestly, that Capricorn, the shadow of Capricorn, can be so debilitating, that it's like the gravity that any soul can experience is, a really difficult thing. It will make you sick, as you said. So to not allow yourself to cling to something that's not going to serve you. Even God does not want you to carry things to that degree, perhaps, but to find a place of forgiveness if there has been something that you have done that, your soul does not want to carry it on forever. So I think it was really beautiful, now that I think about it, what she was really trying to say in that moment.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean there isn't space to acknowledge that there are things that I've learned along the way, but
Right.
it's not necessary to hold that construct of I've done something wrong.
Right. So those of you with Chiron and Capricorn, this is the message, right? I know that a lot of people with the signature, in Kanye's situation, obviously that way, he was kind of judging others so much in his journey. But as a lot of souls that experience this own personal judgment, there must be something wrong with me. I must have done something wrong. I must have done something to deserve this. Even I have guilt and I don't know why. I mean, all these things that there's a whole boatload of energy that can be set free and released and healed when you can get inside the center of it. And look at it from a natural perspective. Does that make sense from a natural perspective?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Ari. That was an awesome show. I loved it. And we will be back. Before the end of the year, we are going to cover Chiron in Aquarius and Chiron in Pisces. Wow. And thank you so much for joining us on this journey. And until next time, namaste.